This morning we kind of have just a conglomeration of things that are going on that tie in with Scripture, things that we've been talking about, end times events, last days events. Of course, this picture here, um, the actual picture itself is the Mount of Olives. That's a picture of the Mount of Olives, just taken recently, Um, and the scripture I've got up there is from Isaiah 46, verses 9 through 10. And it says, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand and I will do all my pleasure." You know, all this stuff that we're seeing start to unfold, these shadowings, the rebirth of the nation of Israel and all the things that we're seeing, all this stuff was foretold from the beginning. The Bible is one continuous story from front to back. I know that we often try to divide it into Old Testament and New Testament, and we divide this and divide that into different categories and sections and whatnot, but it's one fluid story from start to finish. Another scripture that would go good with this picture um, is in John chapter 14. Um, and it starts at verse 28. John 14 and 28 says, "You have heard me say to you," and this is Jesus speaking, "You have heard me say to you, I'm going away and I'm coming back to you." And that's where he left from, and that's where he's coming back to. And it says, he goes on to say, "If you love me, you would rejoice because I said that I am going to the Father, for my Father is greater than I. And now that I have told you before it comes, when it does come to pass, you may believe." We're seeing these things starting to form up. We're seeing shadowings of different things taking place in the world that, of course, we know that they're not going to come to fruition and into their fullness until the tribulation period, the 7 years of Jacob's trouble, or whatever you want to call it, the 70th week of Daniel. But we're starting to see shadowings of these things, and they're all starting to form up. And there's been something troubling me in the back of my mind, and I'm kind of rambling right now, so you just have to bear with me. Um, but throughout the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, Peter talks about it a lot. We have this phrase that, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man returns. In other words, that the last days will reflect the days before the flood. And then, of course, Luke even goes on, and Peter too, and talks about how it was in Sodom and Gomorrah before Lot was taken out of the way. And I've often thought about that, and it kind of runs around in my mind because when you find these scriptures, it'll go into a detail saying something to the effect of they were buying and trading, they were giving in marriage and being married. They were just doing normal, ordinary stuff, that they weren't really paying attention to the signs and all the stuff that was going on around them. They were just carrying on like normal. And I keep thinking in the back of my mind, I'm missing something there. When I read that, I'm missing something there. You know, could it be? And I don't have an answer for you. This is just something that's kind of popped up in my mind in the last few days, and I've been trying to kind of study it a little bit. But could it be that we see this repeated? Like I said, you see it in Matthew, you see it in Mark, you see it in Luke, you see it in Peter, you see it in different places, and always it's followed by this description of things that are going on. Could that be a warning to the church? Could that be a warning to the church? We think about the world going on about their business, not paying any attention to the signs that are happening around us. But that's kind of a given. The world's not going to pay attention to what God's doing. Never has, never will. But all these epistles and all this stuff was written to the church. Is that kind of just a warning to the church that the church will be doing the things of the world instead of the things that it needs to be doing. Something to ponder, something to think about. I'm going to look into it further, but yeah, there should be things that we should be doing because of the signs, but we're not. We're just carrying on like normal. We're just keep going on like normal. Breaking news. Israel conducts ground incursion in Gaza. Tanks roll through the border area. If you didn't know it, they started the ground war into Gaza. This map, you can see the 3 red arrows up in the upper right-hand corner. That is where they've moved into that northern region and are conducting ground exercises and eliminating Hamas operatives as they move down towards Gaza. But that's what's going on. We need to be praying for the peace and the salvation of Israel. I don't worry about the nation. I know that God, who never slumbers or sleeps, watches over them. We know that if you study the book of Daniel, Daniel reveals that they have a watcher that stands guard over them, and it's the archangel Michael, that great prince, the commander of the armies of heaven, has a special charge to watch over Israel in the last days. Weapons flood West Bank, fueling fears of a new front with Israel. Next slide, Joseph. You can see the West Bank area right there just north of Jerusalem. There has been some reports of some clashes and fighting along the West Bank lines. Of course, there's been fighting in the north. Israel has evacuated almost all the towns and settlements along the northern border between Israel and Syria and Israel and Lebanon. And the fighting has intensified in those areas. On the front, with watching things that may lead to the Ezekiel conflict, the war, Gog-Magog war. Little things going on in the background. Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad chiefs discuss route to victory on Israel. They've been meeting. There's been a lot of phone calls. There's been a lot of shuffling behind the scenes between Iran, Turkey, Russia, Sudan, Libya, all the countries that Ezekiel tells us that will be involved in this coalition. They've all been really working behind the scenes here in the last 14 days or so. Israel outraged after Turkey's Erdogan calls Hamas liberators, cancels planned trip to mend ties. Complete breakdown in relations between Israel and Turkey. Israel's National Security Council urges its citizens in Turkey to leave as soon as possible following Al-Ala hospital bombing. We talked about the hospital bombing. It happened right at the very beginning of the war. It was not the Israelis that bombed the hospital. It was a failed missile launch. Do you all know how Hamas makes their missiles? It's like me and Denny saying, we want to build us a missile, and we get some tubing and we weld it up and weld some fins on it, and they mix sugar and ammonium nitrate together to make the fuel, and they build it in their garage. Weld some fins on it, put some explosives in the end, and then they launch it out of their garage towards Israel. These are not military grade. All the weapons are not military grade. A lot of them that fail and fall are made in their basements or in their garages. They're not, military grade weapons. Blinken, Israel needs to think about who will rule Gaza if Hamas is toppled. That's interesting. Go to the next slide, Joseph. Remember this from last week, Joel 3:2? I will gather the armies of the world into the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now that will happen at the very end of the tribulation. That's referring to what we always call the Battle of Armageddon, right after the end of that. And he says, there I will judge them for harming my people, my special possession, for scattering my people among the nations, and for dividing up my land. That's what God will judge the nations on when he judges them after the Battle of Armageddon. This is what Biden come up with this week. Biden calls for a concentrated effort towards future two-state solution for Israel and Palestinians. That two-state solution is dividing up the land, folks. That's what they've been doing. That's how Gaza came into being, was during the Bush administration. Israel controlled that area, and the Bush administration got with the Israelis and said, look, if you just give them this little bitty section, if all the Israelis leave, there'll be peace. There'll be peace. I promise there'll be peace. So the Israelis withdrew all the Israeli citizens out of Gaza, gave them their own little state, provided them with all free electricity and all free water, and then this happens. The world's largest news agency, the Associated Press, instructs reporters to avoid terror label for Hamas. Hamas terrorists found with instructions to decapitate Jews and remove hearts and livers. Folks, I've watched the autopsy reports. I've seen the photos. I've seen the videos. I've spared you all from watching that. If you all want to get online, you can find Amir's Telegram page. He's posted a lot of that stuff. It's blurred out, so you can click it if you wish to watch it. But I've watched coroners that have been doing this for 30 years, have seen all kinds of horrendous things. These, in Israel, break down in tears over doing these autopsies, on these people that were killed by Hamas terrorists. I mean, just completely break down. It's evil in the flesh. It really is. Hamas terrorists had instructions for using cyanide-based chemical bombs linked to Al-Qaeda. This has not been something that's been talked about a lot, but they have found, they didn't actually use any, but they found instructions on how to create them and how to use them in an effective manner. I don't think that we're immune to this type of stuff over here, folks. I really don't. And I'm not trying to scare anybody. I just don't think that we're immune to it. If you're not aware, this is a lot of what the Israelis are dealing with. If you see the little red square cube, that indicates a rocket emplacement. The white box is a kindergarten grade school. And that's what Hamas does. They put their rocket launchers in and around hospitals and around schools, in people's garages, so close to the humans, to the non-combatants, that it's almost impossible for the Israelis to knock these things out without injuring civilians. They hide by innocent civilians behind them. Luke 21, 9 through 11, it says, "But when you hear of wars and commotions, do not be terrified, for these things must come to pass first, but the end will not come immediately. Then he said to them, nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes in various places, famines, pestilence. There will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven." We're seeing a little bit of all of that right now. There's nothing on that list that we're not seeing a smattering of. As far as nation against nation, ethnic group against ethnic group, glory to our martyrs. George Washington University students project pro-terror message on campus building. They were promoting, the martyrs. The martyrs, they're not talking about the Jewish people. They're talking about the Hamas terrorists that were killing Israelis. New York City militants chant, "There is only one solution," in a march against Israel. Interestingly enough, you see some Jews over on the far right-hand side with this. We don't really think about it, but they also have the same problems that we have, as far as there's conservative Jews and there's liberal Jews. And some of the liberal Jews think that they just need to go right along with all this. I'm not sure who thought that this was a good idea. Michigan State apologizes for Adolf Hitler's image on Spartan Stadium scoreboard. I actually looked this up. It actually did happen. I found it very hard to believe that that was placed up there during a ball game. Russia says the U.S. will not be at the center of the new world order. I put that up there because that's kind of interesting because, that's what we talk often about the World Economic Forum, a one world order, Klaus Schwab and all his cronies and how they're pushing for a one world order. Well, in their 2030 agenda, they have a whole list. If you get on the World Economic Forum's website and look up Agenda 2030, they'll have a whole list of things that they wish to accomplish by 2030. And that's one of their goals also, that the United States will no longer be a superpower. Interesting. Russia simulates nuclear strike after opting out of treaty. The Russians and the Chinese both in the last 14 days have moved around nuclear weapons like there was no tomorrow, shuffling them around. The Russians, they go by a different doctrine as far as their nuclear capabilities than we do. Most of our intercontinental ballistic missiles are in hardened silos and stay in that one location loaded into that silo. Our unknown factor are our Polaris guided missile submarines that nobody knows where they're at in the oceans, and that's the surprise element. The Russians, since they lost a lot of their submarine fleet when the Soviet Union collapsed, they still have some guided missile submarines, not as many as they once did. But to supplement that and keep everybody guessing, what the Russians do is all their intercontinental ballistic missiles are loaded on the back of great big, like 30-wheel trailers. These great big, huge trailers that have multiple tires on them, and they'll actually back them up to a silo that's a concrete silo in the ground, and they vertically lift that missile and then lower it into the silo. And the idea is that they have these fields of silos, but we never know which ones are loaded and which ones are not loaded. They can move them around. And they also have the capability of launching them from the tractor trailer rig itself, if they wish. Pentagon warns China now has over 500 operational nuclear warheads as it seeks nuclear parity with the U.S. Bipartisan panel reports indicate U.S. should get ready for a simultaneous war with both China and Russia. I think that all these things would definitely fall underneath the category of wars and rumors of wars, don't you all? Earthquakes. Lots of earthquakes still going on. These are all that happened between 1023 and 1027, 5.0 or greater. This past week, there was some earthquakes in the 2.1, 2.2 throughout New Madrid, down around New Madrid, Tennessee, and one up in Illinois right around Cave and Rock in this past week. Yellowstone's really been moaning and groaning a lot. Why do I think that this is significant? Personally, I think it's significant from the viewpoint of in Revelations chapter 6, the sixth seal that's broken is a great earthquake that says, John tells us in that every mountain will be moved and every island will be moved out of place. It's the first of three great earthquakes that happened during the 7 years. But we're starting to see all these tectonic plates and fault lines starting to shift and get more active. And we're seeing a massive increase in the amount of earthquakes. So is that telling me that time is getting closer because we're seeing this activity? We'll just have to wait and see. This is interesting. Hurricane Otis was the strongest hurricane to ever make landfall on the Pacific side of Mexico. Did y'all keep up with that just a little bit? Not really. I didn't either. I ain't gonna lie. It kind of blindsided me. I was too busy focused on Israel and what's going on over there. But this hurricane came up last week, and it was never supposed to be a hurricane. They thought it was going to be a very strong tropical storm, maybe a Category 1. Overnight, From one night to the next morning, it went from a tropical storm to a Category 5, slammed into Acapulco. Yep, there's a picture of Acapulco. Hurricane Otis leaves behind a nightmare scenario after striking Acapulco, Mexico. The hurricane made landfall as a Category 5 intensity. Um, they've a lot of the weather people say they've not seen anything like this since the early 1960s, and still they think that this is going to be a record breaker, that they've never seen one intensify so quick. Red alert in Vanuatu, however you pronounce that, Loa, becomes Southern Hemisphere's earliest Category 5 tropical cyclone. Still lots of activity going on out there. Lots of strange and odd weather. Super fog leads to tragic 158 vehicle pileup on Interstate 55 in Louisiana. October snowfall in Fairbanks almost doubles seasonal average for this time of year. I know that Chip and Lana, they've been talking about the black ice and stuff that they ran into. Janet, you were talking about your it says in the scriptures that it's in a couple of different places. Daniel talks about it, that the Antichrist will attempt to change the times and the seasons, or the times and the laws. Could that mean that we see the weather getting all kinds of out of whack? Of course, the powers that be are saying climate change, and we know that it's not climate change. I really believe it's God trying to get everybody's attention. Revelations 13 and 16 and verse 17, he says, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and that no one may buy, sell, except the one that has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. And we know that the Antichrist is going to set up a one world economic system, a one world economy. And through that one world economy, nobody will be able to buy, sell, or trade unless they have his mark on their right hand or their forehead. And we've talked about that. And then, of course, in Revelations 18 and 3, it says, for all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And that's the great harlot of Babylon. And, of course, drunk of the wine of her fornication, of a one world religion. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, a one world government. And the merchants of the earth have become rich through her abundance of her luxury, a one world economic system. I know that we talk about this from time to time, but we've kind of got sidetracked with the war in Israel. But the CBDC, central bank digital currency thing, is being pushed even harder now than it ever has been. This comes from the Economic Collapse blog. Financial crisis is here. U.S. banks are closing down hundreds of branches and laying off thousands of workers. The largest banks in America have collectively cut 20,000 jobs so far this year. I actually looked this all up, folks. In 2022, last year, they shut down 3,000 branch banks in the United States, and they opened 1,000. Well, if I did my math right, if you close down 3,000 and you open up 1,000, that means you still have a deficit of 2,000. That 2,000 were closed and never reopened. We're seeing this push towards this central bank digital currency. We haven't talked about AI in a while. They're using it for more and more stuff, folks. It's just running rampant. ChatGPT can figure out your personal data using simple conversations, warn researchers. That's interesting that you're on ChatGPT and you're trying to cheat on your high school exam or write an essay or whatever you're trying to do, and it's gleaning information from you. I find that intriguing. Next slide. Amazon unveils new robots, AI to improve warehouse operations, speed up delivery times, and reduce worker injuries and replace workers. Now, here's something that might actually be worthwhile. Google AI optimizes traffic lights, reduce congestion, 30% fewer stops, 10% drop in emissions. Boy, it'd be nice, but it seems like they must have my number because every time I come to a stoplight, it's red, especially when I've got to be at a certain place at a certain time. I don't know if I'm the only one that it's like, oh, not sure what to kind of make of this. We've talked about it before. We've talked about the synthetic lab-grown meats and different stuff. And it's a major meat producer, Tyson, invest in insect proteins and lipids, uses animal waste to feed flies, which then will be turned into food for pets, agriculture, and livestock industries. A lot of talk with them playing around with making flour out of crickets. I think me and Teresa had a conversation about making flour out of cattails. I believe I'm opting for the cattails over the crickets. Italy's actually got some sense. Italy to ban fake lab-grown meat. I don't know if you realize it or not, and it's something that I knew, but I had forgotten. But Europe actually has very stringent laws over their foods as far as what can be put in food. They don't allow a lot of chemicals and stuff to be put in their food over there. Everything is a lot more natural over there than it is over here. Their laws are a lot more strict and more stringent. This is just kind of mind-boggling, like a lot of this stuff. Citing disproportionately harm to students of color, Oregon high schoolers no longer need to demonstrate basic competencies in reading, writing, or math in order to graduate. So if they don't need to demonstrate basic competency in read, writing, and math, what do they? Yeah, I don't know. You read this stuff, and then and I actually look some of this stuff up. Actually, I look all of it up. I look up different articles and read different stuff to get some background and some context. And it's just like it blows your mind. It's like it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Yeah, it just I don't know. It just blows your mind. Um, At a Florida school board meeting, a book presented by a parent was deemed beyond disgusting and X-rated, only to find out the book was checked out from the school's own library. And if you look up this stuff, you're going to find it actual videos of them reading from these books that were checked out of the school libraries, and they're graphic beyond detail, folks. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Just yeah. Um, I don't know if y'all are aware of this. We've talked about it. We touched on it in the past. Um, Back several months ago, it's probably getting pretty close to a year now. Canada has a very liberal assisted death policy to help people, if you want to end your life, and they had guidelines, if you were mentally ill or you had a chronic disease or whatnot, you could go to the government and then they will pay for you to commit suicide. They'll help you. Well, they've expanded it. Canada will legalize medically assisted dying for eligible people addicted to drugs. Whatever happened to life is precious, life is dear, every life is, Jesus says, the Father says, that he wishes none to perish, but for everyone to come to salvation. Everybody is precious in his sight. We're losing that, folks. We're reverting back to the way that the pagans think. The And it's really, if you get to thinking about it, it's just evil. It's just evil. Yeah. Um, we talked about this last week just a little bit. This is another university that is offering degrees in magic and the occult. It says the growth of paganism. UK's University of Exeter offers a master's degree in magic and the occult. Um, yeah, you can't make this stuff up, folks. And this hurt my heart. The loneliness epidemic. Nearly 1 in 4 adults feel lonely. New survey finds. And the scripture up there I've got is Matthew 24:12, and it says, because of lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Don't let your love grow cold. Don't do it, folks. I run into this every single day um, at a Walmart or a Walgreens or a CVS, that there'll be somebody there that'll be trying to print pictures. Generally, it's an elderly person, and they just want someone to talk to them. Sometimes they don't even need help. They'll act like they need help, but they really just want somebody to talk to them. They really do. I don't know how many people that I've never met before in my entire life, and I'll walk up and say, "Hey, are you having trouble there? Can I help you download your pictures or whatever?" And I end up hearing their entire life story. I mean, because they're just, you know, people are lonely. They feel like they're isolated. Things have changed so much that people are just feeling like they're left behind. You know, that society just doesn't have any time for them anymore. And, that's a great opportunity to share the love of Jesus with them. Um, Israel tells citizens to stockpile food for 4 months while war is being waged. Um, are you putting a little back? Have you got a little put back? If you don't, I think it's a good idea that you do. Um, Times could get very tough. Things could change in the blink of an eye. We saw that. If we learn any lesson from what happened with Israel, and the attacks that they suffered from Hamas, is one day everything was normal, and the next day their whole world was turned upside down. And that very well could be the case for us. But the most important thing is Jesus Christ. Be spiritually prepared, then be emotionally and mentally prepared. And then finally, on down the line, try to be physically prepared. But the most important thing is to be spiritually prepared and then mentally prepared so you can help the people that are around you. If things start to unfold, and we don't know which direction it will take, maybe it'll be a terrorist attack, maybe it'll be a world war, maybe it'll be, we could, maybe it'll be a massive earthquake. We don't know what's going to trigger all this stuff and make all these dominoes start to fall. The Bible gives us some indicating factors. It tells us some things to watch for, but there's a lot of things that it just doesn't fill in the blanks, and we don't really know. But when things do unravel, there's going to be a lot of people that are not going to be able to deal with that. They're not going to know what's going on, and they're not going to be able to understand what's happening. And that's where we need to shine as followers of Christ, as Christians, is to be able to reach out and help these people, tell them the truth. Whether they believe us or not, well, that's on them. But knowing the truth, knowing what's going to happen, knowing what is happening, it's a big thing. It's like, I've kind of I've seen the writing on the wall with my job for some time. It's a dying industry. People don't print pictures like they used to. And you can see these little subtle changes that have been happening over the last 2 years. And the Lord put it on my heart to do certain things and make preparations. But now that it's right around the corner, that I've been told, pretty much, between January and April, you're going to get laid off, unless something drastic happens. Now that the time's here, it's kind of like, it's like, oh man, I've known it's coming for 2-3 years now. But then, you kind of you shuffle it to the back of your mind, but it doesn't stop it from progressing. And that's the way prophecy is. It doesn't really make any difference if we believe it or not. It's not stopping God's timeline. It just he keeps doing his thing. He sends us all these signs. He sends us all these warnings. He sends us, and all these things are happening. And we just have to wake up and smell the coffee and get busy and get busy. Thoughts? We got plenty of time. Right. Well, realistically speaking, even if we're not in the last days, I believe that we are, but let's play the devil's advocate and say, hey, we're not. Um, at the very least, we're looking at the very real possibility of a world war. Um, never lived through a world war before. My grandparents did, and my grandparents used to talk about it a lot. Of course, Grandpa was not drafted because he was a locomotive engineer during World War II, and they needed him to move freight here in the United States, so he wasn't drafted, but all his brothers were, and my grandmother's brothers, and Uncle Earl never came home. But they talked. I remember the stories about the ration cards. Not being able to buy any sugar, not being able to get gas, rubber, tires for your car. All of it went to the war effort. We're already starting to see some hints at stuff like that. All you sportsmen out there, I don't know that if you're aware of it or not, but CCI, Spear, Federal, and Remington, munitions manufacturers, they are big commercial, make ammunition for hunting, regular ammo for normal everyday use. They were all sold to a huge international conglomerate this past week for an exorbitant amount of money. And all of a sudden, the commercial supply of ammunition has dried up. Biden also told the U.S. arsenals that make ammunition for the military, small arms ammunition like 5.56 and 308 or 223, whatever you want to cease all sales to the civilian public. So overnight, it's kind of like they've turned off the valve of commercial munition sales. So ammunition is drying up. Um, we could, yeah, but we could see this go all the way across the spectrum and run from thing to different thing to different thing. There's some really strange stuff going on in the background in politics. I mean, there's some really weird stuff. I'm not going to dive too deep into that because that's kind of a rabbit hole in itself, but you see some really weird things that don't make sense. Of course, a lot of the stuff I gave you this morning don't make sense. 10 to 15 million immigrants have come across the border in the last 3 years. A vast majority of them being, like you said, Joseph, 18 to 35-year-old military age males. Who knows what that's gonna bring? But let me stress again, knowing Jesus Christ doesn't make any difference. Jack Hibbs, I listen to Jack Hibbs when I'm driving sometimes, his preaching, and he's got a phrase that he uses. He says it doesn't make any difference if it's by hook or by crook, by rupture or by rapture. As long as you know Jesus Christ, you're going to the right place. It doesn't make any difference how we end up out of here. So don't put that off, because that's really what it's all about, is that relationship with Jesus. You know, we can be as ready as we can be for this stuff around us, or to help our neighbor, to reach out in love and be able to help people. And that's what we're called to do, to live for God and to live for his cause and his purpose.